Most people completely misunderstand this idea. We tend to think that our global health systems are driven purely by science, logic, and natural phenomena. But what if I told you that is completely wrong? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into some really profound source material by John Green to uncover a massive, hidden truth about how the modern world actually operates. We're going to explore a somewhat dangerous, yet absolutely undeniable thesis about a killer that has quietly shaped our societies for centuries. Okay, let's just jump right in.
If I asked you to name the deadliest infectious disease on Earth right now, what's your first guess? Your mind probably jumps straight to COVID-19, right? Or maybe something that constantly dominates the news cycle like Ebola or HIV. But here is the part most people miss. History doesn't just stay in the past.
Over 1.25 million. That is the staggering number of people who died from tuberculosis in 2023 alone. Now, COVID-19 did briefly displace it for a couple of years, but in 2023, TB regained the grim title it has basically held for most of human history. To put that massive number into perspective, last year more people died of tuberculosis than of malaria, typhoid, and war combined. Literally, over 1 billion humans have died from it in just the last 2 centuries.
But here is the absolutely jarring contradiction that we need to confront today. Tuberculosis is not some mysterious, invincible superbug. It has been completely curable since the 1950s. We possess a nearly 100% effective cure. We know exactly how to live in a world without this disease. But, as the author points out, we simply choose not to live in that world. So, how did we get here? To understand why millions are still dying from a completely curable illness, we have to look at the stories we tell ourselves about being sick.
Part 1. The flattering malady myth.
For a really long time, tuberculosis was known as consumption, or thesis, and the way society viewed it perfectly illustrates a massive historical lie. People thought of consumption as this romantic illness, a white man's plague that supposedly only affected highly sensitive, brilliant, artistic individuals. It was viewed almost as an inherited trait of the intellectual elite, but the industrial reality on the ground was entirely different. It was actually a disease of the working poor, spreading like wildfire through crowded slums, packed sweatshops, and poorly ventilated factories during the Industrial Revolution.
Yet society heavily romanticized this illness just to mask its terrifying reality. The famous poet John Keats, who actually died of it himself, wrote, "Youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies." Writers from that era described patients passing away with this air of innocence and peace. But honestly, an autopsy of Keats showed his lungs were completely gone. The truth was brutal. Young people in the prime of their lives were literally suffocating to death, drowning in their own bodily fluids. But society? They preferred the romantic lie.
Well, that romantic myth completely shattered in 1882. That's when Dr. Robert Koch discovered the microscopic bacteria that actually causes TB. Suddenly, the flattering malady of the sensitive genius vanished overnight. Arthur Conan Doyle even wrote about the discovery, saying, "How absurd that we who can kill the tiger should be defied by this venomous little atom." But finding the bacteria didn't actually solve the problem. It just changed who we blamed. The medical establishment shifted from viewing it as this poetic trait to a disease of filth, heavily stigmatizing the poor and marginalized. And that leads us to a profound, tragic modern injustice. We found the bacteria, and eventually we found the cure. But the suffering didn't end.
Part 2. The geography of death.
There is a stark contrast in human history we really need to address. The author shares a story about his great-uncle Stokes, who died of TB in Tennessee back in 1930 at the age of 29. Now, Stokes died because the science simply didn't exist to save him yet. But contrast that with Henry, a 17-year-old boy the author recently met in Sierra Leone. Henry was suffocating and malnourished from TB, but Henry isn't suffering because science hasn't found a cure. He's suffering simply because he was born in the wrong geography.
I want to let that reality sink in for a second. As Dr. Peter Mugiani famously said about systemic health failures, the drugs are where the disease is not. And where is the disease? The disease is where the drugs are not. That perfectly encapsulates the brutal geography of modern medicine. The cure exists, for sure, but it sits locked behind walls of wealth and location.
You see, we aren't waiting on some futuristic experimental science to save people like Henry. Over 90% of people who get sick with TB have a strain that could be fully cured with something called the RIPE regimen. It's a combination of 4 specific antibiotics. And here is the kicker. All 4 of those drugs are over 50 years old. We have known exactly how to cure this for decades, yet we choose not to distribute those drugs equitably across the globe.
Which brings us to the most paradigm-shifting idea in this explainer. If we have a 50-year-old cure and millions are still dying, what is actually killing them? Spoiler alert, it's not just a bacteria.
Part 3, the real social pathogen.
We humans love to assign meaning to illness. We always ask what someone did to deserve it. But biology has no moral compass. Bacteria do not care if you are a good person or a bad person. They literally just want to multiply. Human systems, however, do have moral compasses, and sometimes they are deeply, deeply flawed. We stigmatize the sick. We constantly push them to the margins of society.
And this brings us right to the core thesis of our source text. In the 21st century, tuberculosis is no longer strictly caused by a bacterium, it is caused by the social determinants of health. We're talking about things like malnutrition, deep poverty, crowded living conditions with terrible ventilation, and systemic marginalization. The TB bacteria might be the bullet, but these social failures, they are what pull the trigger. They weaken the immune system and essentially lay out a welcome mat for the bacteria to thrive.
Just consider this mind-blowing number. Of the 10 million people who got sick with active TB last year, over 5 million of them were also experiencing malnutrition. Let me repeat that. Half of all TB patients were malnourished. TB isn't some random indiscriminate killer. It is a highly specialized predator that walks the exact trails of inequity and injustice that we have blazed for it. So if human-built inequity is the true driver of the disease today, we really have to look in the mirror. It's time to challenge a fundamental assumption we all make about the nature of disease itself.
Part 4. We are the cause.
We often just accept deaths from disease as natural causes, right? It's just a part of life. But the author highlights this really brilliant thought. None of us actually wants to live in a natural world. Think about it for a minute. Treating a disease with antibiotics is deeply unnatural. Hospitals are unnatural, but we absolutely love unnatural interventions when they save us. The terrifying truth is that we selectively decide which diseases and which people get our miraculous unnatural interventions. Believe me, if TB became a massive crisis in wealthy nations tomorrow, we would eradicate it instantly.
And the thing is, we know exactly how to fix this. The global health community already has a concrete, easily digestible framework called the STP Initiative. It stands for Search, Treat, and Prevent. The plan is to hire healthcare workers to search household by household to diagnose people early. Then, treat them with the antibiotics we've had for decades. And finally, prevent further spread by giving preventive therapy to their close contacts. It's a proven, highly structured, and completely realistic solution.
So what is actually stopping us? Well, the cost to implement this comprehensive care globally and drive tuberculosis toward elimination is $25 billion a year. Now, I know that sounds like a massive number to you and me, but globally speaking, it is entirely achievable. Furthermore, experts estimate that this investment would yield a 40-to-1 return in the long run by eliminating the massive economic burden of the disease. It's really not a question of capability, it's simply a question of priority.
And this brings us to our final takeaway. The deadliest infectious disease on Earth isn't just a medical failure, it's a designed social injustice. We have literally built a world where the cure exists, but it's kept from the people who need it most entirely because of where they live and how much money they have. We are the cause of tuberculosis in the 21st century. So the question I want to leave you with, and the question this incredibly powerful source material demands we answer, is this. We are the cause, will we be the cure? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.